In the previous podcast, we went over how to do the visibility swap as far as interacting your character with an object in the scene. Now we're going to go over to having to do the parent constraint. You're trying to accomplish the same thing between the visibility swap and the parent constraint, in that you're trying to interact with an object in the scene without actually keying the object for each motion that it's doing. The difference between the two is that while you have several objects in your scene for the visibility swap, indicating when it's on the ground, when it's in the hand, and if you're letting go of it again, for the parent constraint, you'll only have the one object, and you're going to be animating the actual constraint of it. The plus side is that you only have the one object, so it doesn't interfere with things like motion blur and so forth when you're rendering. The downside is it's a little bit more complicated to set up the parent constraint, so we're going to go over some of the options and problems inherent to doing that. So again, we have the animation of Bugsy's hand swiping by, picking up the ball, and then dropping it. We're just going to apply a lot of the same principles that we used on the visibility swap to doing the parent constraint. Again, we want to apply this at the point of contact, whenever he's going to be first grabbing the ball, or when he's going to be letting go of it. So again, this is at frame 16, when you can see that Bugsy's hand is clearly just making first contact with the ball and going to be grabbing it. What we're going to do is select the parent first. And again, if you want to select the control box, or if you want to turn on your joints and select the root wrist joint of this, either one of those will work just fine. You don't want to select the mesh because it won't work with that. The mesh actually has no values to constrain onto. So you can select the control box as the parent, and then select the child. Make sure we're under our animation tab. Go to constrain, parent, and open up the option box. Now these are the default options for the parent constraint, so we want to make sure that a few of these things are checked on anyway. The main one you want to pay attention to is the maintain offset. You want to make sure this is checked on. Otherwise, if it's not checked on, the object will snap to the pivot point of the parent. So the child will snap to the pivot point of the parent, and in this case will be right at the wrist. So you want to make sure this is checked on so it actually stays in the same world space as it is right now. And of course, make sure that it's getting all the translations and all the rotations of the parent. So now we can add, and you can see now throughout the entire animation the ball is constrained to the hand. You'll also notice that when I select the ball, the channels for the translation rotations now are blue because it's getting constraint data, and you can see the left arm weight channel down here underneath. Now if this was just a one-time action where the hand is only going to pick up the ball and it's going to stay there for the rest of the scene, it's perfectly fine to animate just this weight channel. This controls if the constraint is actually turned on or off. Right now the default is at 1, so if we key this here at this frame and then move one frame before that and key it at 0, then you get the same idea we had with the visibility swap, where it's on the pedestal here and then one frame switches and he grabs it. However, we have two issues with this. One, you may notice that on the timeline, the keys that I placed on here do not appear. That's because the keys I placed were on the actual constraint node, not the actual ball. So to actually see these keys, I would have to go and grab the constraint node. So now, with that constraint node grabbed, and I've selected, now I can actually see the keys that I put on there for the weight. But by simply grabbing anything in the scene, those don't appear on here. So you have to be careful about grabbing this if you're retiming anything in your scene. Make sure you go back and grab the constraint node. The other thing is, as I said before, it only works as a one-way kind of deal. If I want to let go of the ball again, let's say at this point I want to key the arm weight at 1 and then let go of it here and turn it to 0, what you'll see happen is it snaps right back to where it started at. This is because as far as the values are concerned, it goes right back to 0, 0, 0 and snaps way back over here. This is what makes doing the weight constraint not the optimal way of handling a parent constraint in this situation. So let's delete those keys. So now again we can start with the weight as normal. And on frame 16 is when he's going to grab it. So instead of actually animating the weight on the constraint, what we're going to do is we're going to animate what we call the blend parent channel, because he's going to be picking the ball up and then dropping it down again. So again, we've applied the constraint here. What we want to do now is go over to the translation and rotations and key is selected. Now you can see, for one, the channel's changed from blue to this green color, but also more importantly, it added a channel automatically called the blend parent channel. Maya will do this anytime you put keyframe data on a constraint. That's what happens. That's what causes these channels to turn green. So what's going on here now is when you play through it, you can see that the ball no longer follows the hand. That is because of this blend parent channel. The purpose of the blend parent channel is basically to differentiate for Maya, should it follow the constraint data or should it follow the key data. With the blend parent channel, we don't need to key the weight because the weight's always going to be at 1. We're simply telling Maya, should it pay attention to the weight values, which say 1, or should it follow the keyframe data, which says stay at 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. So at this point, with the blend parent at 0, it's completely following the keyframe data. If we change this to 1, it's completely following the weight data, the constraint data. So this is what we'll be animating to make sure that the character grabs onto and then lets go of the ball as needed. So at frame 16, when he first grabs it, we've already keyed the translation and rotation values. Now we need to key the blend parent and change this to 1 so that it's actually following the constraint. And then we can middle mouse back 1 frame and we can key it at 0. So now it's following the keyframe data, which says stay in place. So now playing through it, up until that point it stays in place following the keyframe data, and then in 1 frame it switches to following the constraint data and carries on from there. Again, unlike the animating the constraint, there are keys now on the timeline that we can edit because it's all on the object and not the constraint itself. And again, now we want to do this at the point of release for the ball, which we'll say again is 44, halfway between it being here and completely dropping away. But you can see that it is inheriting the values from the hand this entire time, even though it's constrained. This is what helps us mark the place of it so we can let go of the ball again. So at frame 44, we're going to key these values again, and we're going to make sure that this is off this time. And now we can middle mouse 1 frame before it and turn it back on. So this way, between this frame and 43, it's completely following the constraint data. But then at 44, it's following the keyframe data, and we're using the values that the constraint, the arm, was giving it to mark where it is in world space, so it actually stays there. If we hadn't keyed this, again, it would just snap back to where it was before, just like when we had the weight data on there. So it's good that we keyed that so we can mark the space of it. And then from here we can animate the sphere as normal. So the parent constraint is a little bit trickier to set up because of having to key and constrain the object, and then keying the blend parent on and off, as well as keying the translations and rotations of the object. But it only leaves 1 object in the scene to edit in the first place. And that's how you handle the parent constraint. Thanks for watching.